Oh,
She's a
right.
scientist, god damn it.
She's a yeoman.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So no, she's not
So
a scientist.
she makes archery equipment.
Yeah,
I should have known.
greetings, Denevins. Welcome to episode 27 of the Lasercomb Podcast, the weekly show where we comb through random episodes of classic TV series with a fine-tooth laser. I'm the Siege, one of your hosts.
And I'm Cal, your other host.
Lately on the Lasercomb Podcast, our format has kind of changed a little bit in the sense that we've started focusing on dedicating different months to different themes. I think that's probably how the show is going to be going forward. I kind
Still
of like
keeping that rando episode.
still keeping the random episode thing, but I like being able to follow themes for specific periods of time. Um,
Our
I
first theme being and yeah,
our, our
yeah.
first theme was actually Christmas month, and then we did Patreon month, and then we did anime month, and
I'm
now
digging it.
I want to keep it going, and now that it is April, and there are 5 weeks in the month of April, 5 Fridays in the month of April, and
Oh shit.
Friday is the day that we record this show, week in and week out. I've decided, well, we decided, but I was the one who pitched the idea that April we are uh, declaring Star Trek month, Star Trunk month. And to give a little bit of an explanation for that, I believe Star Trek arose from our reboot podcast, Alphanumeric, I believe it was, and I think Cal, I think it was you who misspoke and you said Star Trek, and we kind of just ran with it.
My words often slur sometimes to some degree, and especially when I'm like either passionate about something, whether it's mocking it or like trying to just excitedly talking about it. And who's to say whether I even said that on purpose or not? But
I,
there's our copyright free Star Trunk.
Either way, we decided to just run with it, and to
Yeah,
this day, this was probably over a year ago now, and to this
yeah,
day, I now often just casually refer to Star Trek as Star Trek. So here, in the month of April on the Lasercomb podcast, it is Star Trek month. We are going to be doing the five original Star Trek series in order, a random episode each week, as always, but in order, starting with this week, which is Star Trek: The Original Series.
that's
Um,
right.
if you're just joining us, maybe because you're a Star Trek fan, welcome. If you've already been listening to the show, thank you. Um, if you are new, though, and I don't think I've ever actually, since we're starting a new month, new theme for the podcast, um, I've never actually really explained like, what kind of the original mission statement was for this show. And there was a whole bunch of ideas that went into it. It was,
Right, yeah.
but one of the things that I kind of wanted to kind of recreate, as it were, with this podcast was back before the days of streaming. Because nowadays it's like, oh, like you can basically anything you want to watch is available on some streaming service or another, and like you start from the beginning and you go from there. Back before the days of streaming, just watching television casually, which is all of these Star Trek series predate streaming. The way you discovered TV shows often was just stumbling across them. A random episode, and often it was a random episode. It was very rare that you would stumble onto a show on its first episode. It did happen. It happened to me. One of my favorite cartoons as a kid, Beast Wars, which we talk about on our Beast Wars podcast, Too Much Energy on. I happened to stumble across that on the first episode through sheer happenstance.
Yeah,
But
you were waiting for a different show and you're like, oh, let's see what this other thing is.
yeah, I was waiting for reboot, and that's how I discovered Beast Wars. But generally, like back before the days of streaming, you would often discover shows just on a completely random episode, and would then just have to go from there. The show kind of had to week in and week out, especially with very episodic television, which is what Star Trek was. Uh, Not the modern shows, mind you, but the original core, like five Star Trek series. They were mostly episodic, quite episodic in nature.
Hmm.
Basically, with classic network television, it was the every single week the show was setting out. The show was basically like setting out to rope you in with every single episode. Like that's the each episode each week you kind of had to treat every episode like people behind the scenes would have to treat every episode like it was the first episode.
That's how
It was somebody out there's first episode.
many
So,
first viewers might stumble across episode 12 or
yeah,
20 or whatever.
yeah.
And how do we get them to go, oh, this is cool?
I should
And
tune
now
in next week.
tune in every time that it's on. Thus the
Yeah,
episodic nature. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Every episode of television is someone's first episode.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like fumbling my words a little bit there, but basically, like with this podcast, I wanted to kind of recreate that experience in a way, which is one of the reasons why I really like
Okay.
one of the
Now
reasons
I'm
one
yeah.
of the reasons why I really like we do Patreon sponsored episodes quite a shows quite a bit. And that's one of the reasons why I really like getting Patreon pitches from our Patreon subscribers for different shows, especially like if they're shows that I've never seen.
Never even heard of. Yeah.
Or never even heard of, yeah. Because yeah, like I said, with this podcast, I kind of wanted to recreate the experience of just stumbling across TV shows completely at random.
I didn't I also have a bad memory, so you could have told me that. But yeah, I didn't really realize that like theme. But now that you explain it to me, I was like, oh, that iconic like stumbling upon a new episode as if you were like, 15 or doesn't matter what age, and you were just like going through the channels because you were bored or it was after school, and you're like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I dig that. It makes way more sense now.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever actually really explained it before, but like I said, new month, new theme, and we're talking about one of my favorite franchises of all time this month. So I figured this was now was a good time to actually like go into like where like the like randomness, the random factor comes from. The random
Okay.
factor. That could be the name of a original series
The
episode.
random factor.
This week on the Lasercomb podcast, we are talking about episode 29 of Star Trek the Original Series, Operation Annihilate, with an exclamation mark and two hyphens, strangely enough.
Yeah, I noticed that and I was like,
The
interesting.
punctuation, yeah, the punctuation for the title of this episode is very bizarre. But
What is this? The season one finale?
yeah, this is the season finale of the first season of Star Trek the Original Series. So the episode opens up, as always, with the Enterprise. And the Enterprise is on a course to some planet um, because there has been this uh, several planets in like this cluster have all been destroyed, have all like basically torn themselves apart by some like madness ailment.
Mass hysteria that hits these civilizations, kind of makes them destroy themselves and then moves onwards. And they're looking at kind of like a star map, very
Yeah,
rudimentary, but and they're kind of like, well, this was the first planet, this was the second, this was the third. So it seems like, and this happened like 200 years ago, and this happened like 80 years ago, and this happened 25 years ago, and this happened 2 years ago.
and so the planet Deneva is the next planet in this line of people
If this
being
was a sentient thing moving and destroying civilizations, they're kind of being like, well, it looks like it's going this way.
it looks like it's going to go to this planet Deneva, so we need to go there to warn them. basically.
I kind of like that science, the little sciencey parts of this, and there's a lot of it in this episode.
There is, yeah.
Are
So
most episodes like that?
yeah, totally.
I I should go back and watch all of this. Like this, like if anyone's like curious, like I don't know how Siege feels, but like this was actually like quite joyful. Like I really dug this.
Uh, Full disclosure, I'd never actually seen this episode before. Lifelong Star Trek fan. I grew up. I was a kid when Star Trek: The Next Generation was still airing, so for
Yeah,
me, that was Star Trek.
same.
And of course, like Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise. I am fond of all of them in varying degrees. Not big on Deep Space Nine. Controversial opinion.
How dare
Um,
you?
but I never actually watched a ton of the original series when I was a kid. I did really like the movies with the original series cast, though.
Mm,
I watched those a lot, but I didn't watch the original series all that much. So I've seen quite a bit of it, but I haven't seen every single episode, and this was an episode that I hadn't seen. And today I learned that Captain Kirk had a brother named
I
Sam.
yeah,
I
I was
had
like,
no
oh,
idea.
cool. He's got a brother, and he's gone.
And I had no idea that he had a brother. His brother had a wife. He has a nephew. No clue.
I
I'm like, wow, I'm learning shit today.
I've got to stumble upon story for you real quick, but it has to do with the show. I'm familiar with the original series because I used to run home from during lunch from like grade 11, 12, like the end of high school, run
Right.
home where my aunt, amazing cook, would make home cooked meals. She was great. They were always varied. Best sandwiches, like French onion soup, like that kind of thing. I was like spoiled. And I race home, like run, because not only so I could eat, during that like block of time, the original series was on.
Mm.
And I'd watch that with my aunt as like I ate. And I was often like a few minutes late after lunch because I wanted to watch the entire episode. And so sometimes I'd miss just the beginning or just the end. So I've watched like 50 episodes of the original series, but just like that, like in middle chunks and randomly,
Mm.
because they don't play reruns in any order often.
Well, and the original series in particular also didn't air in production order. So
You know what? It could have aired in an order, and I would never have never have known. So good point. I
yeah.
anyways,
Uh,
I thought I'd just throw that out there because that's like literally how I've watched this show. Is like
yeah, that's
stumbling upon it. Yeah.
yeah, it's neat. Um, Speaking of Kirk's brother, so the Enterprise tries to hail the planet, and they get no response, and Kirk is like, oh well, he tells Uhura, the comms officer, to hail at this frequency, and she's like, oh, but that's a private channel, sir, and he's like, yeah, I know, do it. So she does, and she gets through to someone who is talking back and is kind of frantically saying, like, oh, like basically, like, help us, save us. Kirk mentions that this sounds like the voice of his brother's wife. And I'm
And
like,
indeed, he's like, hey, like this is Jim.
right.
Like, hello, are you there? And O'Hara reveals, hey, because he's like, hey, get her back on. That's an order. And she's like, excuse me, but that was one way like message. And her
Yeah.
channel isn't like open. And he's all like, well, we'll keep trying to hail her anyway.
Yeah,
So I
I
kind
was
of
like,
like that he was like, hey, I don't want excuses. Do it. And she like turns in her chair and she's like, actually. And I was like, oh, good for her.
listen, motherfucker, I literally can't, no matter how pissed off you get. So fuck off.
I liked that exchange. It's not just him like Bart. He does a lot of that in this episode where he's all like, damn it, you geeks, figure it out.
I know.
You have an hour. And then he goes off, and I'm like, I understand he's not a scientist or a doctor, but I just imagine him going off and like playing like Tetris or Pong on like the computer, and he's like, well, eggheads, have you figured it out yet?
I know there's a scene in particular later on where he does that I found quite amusing. Meanwhile, so they go to this planet Deneva, and they encounter a ship flying toward the sun, and they're like, "Oh, well, let's go after it." And they open they open comms to this ship, and uh, the ship like gets right to the sun, like gets dangerously close to the sun, like to the point where, and the Enterprise being in pursuit, the Enterprise, they're like, "Sir, our outer hull is has reached over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Like we got to pull back." And through the communications, the person who's flying the Denivan ship is like, "Oh, it's gone. I'm finally free. I'm finally free." And then he burns up.
Yeah.
And so something strange. There's something strange in the neighborhood going on here. They beam down to the planet. Kirk, McCoy, Spock, the holy trinity of Star Trek: The Original Series.
Scotty's there too.
Yeoman Zara, who 10 out of 10. Let me tell you.
Never seen her before, but Christopher's a fan. Let's just say.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Yeoman Zara, and that's all I'm gonna say. Is I would have enjoyed it if she had more screen time. And a couple of red shirts join them down, and they beam down to the planet. And I found this amusing that this was like straight up, just like a like very much like on location, just straight up like a college campus in LA.
I got because of the way it's like built up, but when they're outside, when they just land on this like planet, they're like, oh, by the way, the intel is like, oh, this is like a colony that's been established blah blah years ago. There's about 1 million people on the planet, but the
Right.
city they beam down to is 100,000.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
it's Nanaimo sized.
it should be bustling, and there's no one there. Like there's no
Listeners,
one in the streets.
listeners, Nanaimo, British Columbia is my hometown.
Yeah.
And it has about 100,000 people in it.
And but there's nobody in the streets.
Yeah.
And like they check their readings, and they're like, oh, but by the way, it looks like they're at like a Florida like
This
not a
is
hotel.
this is definitely LA. It's an LA college campus.
There's a pool though, so it kind of looks like part of it is shot at.
I looked this up because I was curious.
It's just
I've
weird. It's just so normal. But the thing is, it's a human colony, so why wouldn't it, be very normal-ish, I guess, right? But yeah, I found it really amusing. I like, it's good that you figured that out, that it's like a campus. I just imagine like Star Trek, like,
well, it's kind of
filming at
refreshing.
this location. Yeah.
It's kind of refreshing too, because like a lot of the time in the original series, when they beam down to a planet, it's just a sound stage with a bunch of styrofoam rocks and like a purple like curtain hung up with like a light behind it for the to represent
The
the
sky.
sky.
Yeah. Yeah. This like wasteland, and now they're just at a campus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found that pretty refreshing. A group of dudes like show up and with like clubs, these like clear like plastic clubs, which I'm like, that's kind of cool.
Weird rods. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
She's
So
got
they
these
show,
plastic rods.
yeah, they show up and are like yelling at the crew, the crew of the Enterprise to like run away, get out of here, go on, get out of here, we don't
Get
want
out
you
of here. We
here.
don't want to have to hurt you.
Yeah. And so they rush them, and the crew of the Enterprise stuns them and knocks them out. And they're like, "Hey, so they were telling us to leave because they didn't want to hurt us, but they were still charging at us." They're
What they were saying was different than their actions.
yeah, so something kind of suspect is going on here.
Hmm.
And so when they scan the planet, because you mentioned like there's no one around. When they scan the planet, they're like, "Oh, well, where are the people?" They're like, "Oh, they're here. They're just all inside."
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that's kind of eerie.
Yeah. And I was like, what's going on? Kudos to like the writers for kind of setting these steps up, because it seems like line to line. Like a lot of it is cheesy, bad writing, like that kind of thing. No, man, this was pioneering at its time.
This is actually like creating like kind of like this is building up suspense here. Like
Absolutely. I
like
was thinking it
it's
was a
eerie.
virus.
This is like this is kind of like horror movie shit. Like they beamed it. They show up this in this town. There's clearly people, but there's no one fucking around. No one's doing anything. Everything is dead quiet. Like that is a horror movie setup right there.
A lot of the episodes are kind of horror themed.
Um,
Spooky shit, man.
yeah, especially in the original series.
I was thinking it was a virus or something.
So was I originally. Um,
Yeah.
and I have things to say about that momentarily because they go to Kirk's brother. What was his brother's name again? Steve. Sam.
Dan.
Sam.
Sam.
Yeah, his nephew's name is Peter. His sister-in-law's name was uh, Arlen. Arlen. Orlin. I don't know.
Orlane. Yeah, something like that. And
Uh,
she is like kind of like screaming, trying to close a vent when
yeah.
they go to their home. And Kirk kind of like goes over and, shakes some sense into her. And McCoy does that like sedative
Yeah.
like thing to her to like calm her down and kind of pass her out. But it's clear she's in some sort of pain, but also like paranoia.
Yeah.
And they check Sam and his brother. Again, we just find out he has a brother, and his brother gets about 1.5 seconds of screen time as they roll over his body, and it's just like a dude.
Isn't it I okay, so I thought it was straight up just William Shatner with a fake mustache on.
I almost thought it was William Shatner with a fake mustache, and I'm like, is this him with a fake mustache just playing dead for one scene? But
I,
I don't think it is.
okay, I'm gonna look this shit up because
Okay.
I'm curious now. But I like the way this is set up though because McCoy says he's like Jim, is that your brother? And he goes and examines him, and he's like, yes, was my brother. He pauses and he's like, was my brother, and I'm like, oh, okay, so that's it was a nice way of like building up like a brief little bit of suspense of whether he was alive or not. Even
Yeah.
though, like at that point, I was like, I was like, yeah, he's probably dead.
And indeed they go and uh McCoy tells
It is Shatner with a fake mustache.
are you serious?
Yeah, I just checked on Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki.
Amazing. I fucking 10 out of 10. Good job. Wow. What a
So,
joy. So Sam, we barely knew ye.
yeah, so Sam Kirk is dead. May he rest in peace.
But his nephew's alive.
Yeah, but his nephew Peter Kirk is alive. So they beam back to the Enterprise because McCoy is like, oh, I can't do anything for them here, and I'm like, okay. And they beam back to the Enterprise, and they're just like in sick bay, and I'm like, you don't know what the fuck is wrong with these people. Like, no quarantine protocols
No
or anything.
quarantine protocols. They're in space. It could be a sickness that you have no immunity built up to. It
Yep.
could be viral,
Yep.
right? It could be something like controlling their like brains, like very viral. And that's you and I were on the same page. We're like, they've been in close proximity, like breathing into each other's like faces. I'm like, if this is some more advanced like virus or whatever, they're fucked now.
Or like even like bacteria or parasitic, like
Yeah, like microscopic paras. So, and we'll get there because it kind of is.
it kind of is, yeah.
Yeah,
But they really all of them ought to be quarantined on the Enterprise until they figure out exactly what's going on.
yeah. The expedition party included. Yeah,
Yeah, the away team, yeah.
but I guess
But
not.
I I I guess not. Um, so Kirk's sister-in-law wakes up, and Kirk is like asking her like what's going on, and she kind of fills him in on very like struggles to like fill him in like
She's in a
on
lot of pain. She's just kind of screaming things.
And she's like, oh, they says something to the effect that like oh, we tried to fight it or whatever, but
They
like
came from another planet, but it's not the crew's fault. The people that brought it here, they had no choice.
yeah, yeah,
And they're forcing us to act as their arms and legs and
yeah,
build ships.
yeah. Okay, so that actually clears something up. For me because I was a little confused about something. So to jump ahead a little bit, Spock ends up getting infected by one of these things, and he goes mad on the Enterprise and tries to take control of the Enterprise. And I wasn't, and it's never really mentioned why after that. And like that whole like, he's like, oh, it wants the ship, and that's kind of just dropped after that. So I was kind of confused as to why, but I'm like, oh, okay, so this is its method of like trying to spread itself.
Mm-hmm. It can loosely use the host and their memory and their thoughts and kind of use pain. Presumably, it's attached to their nervous system, so it can
It is, yeah.
communicate to its desire. Yeah. So what these things? She says that it's using us as our its legs and arms so that we can build ships to presumably go and infect other planets and that kind of thing.
Right.
But what these things are, I love the scene when they stumble upon them. So obviously we mentioned that Spock is the one that gets infected, but when they stumble upon them, it's not a disease or a virus or whatever. There are these big loogies, these
These
big
things
rubber.
these things look so disgusting to me.
They look disgusting. And they're attached to the walls and they're yellow and they're red.
Like
And I
they're
was immediately
kind of
like, "Ooh,
bloody and like pus and
body
ugh.
body snatcher ish." And I'm
Mm,
like, "Oh, okay, I'm seeing these things land on the back of your neck or your back or something and do
yeah.
some shit to you." Immediately I thought of body snatchers. And they try to shoot them and they can fly because you can see they're like dangled by strings and they're like, "Huh, circle, form a ring, a defensive ring." And they like shoot at them and they can like stun them even with like kill settings with their phasers, but they can't kill them. They always recover.
Mm.
And as they're retreating, because like Kirk is like, okay, enough, let's get out of here before more show up or whatever. One latches onto Spock's back,
And
presumably digs some sort of barb into him and infects him.
well, and indeed, McCoy likens it to a wasp or a bee. It injects a stinger into him that starts spreading like through his body. It creates these like little like tentacles of sorts that like
He
wrap
has it
around.
in a jar that he extracted from one of the bodies.
Yeah,
And I'm not sure if we mentioned, but his sister-in-law, Spock, like his brother's wife, she dies.
yeah, yeah. She
Like
dies.
straight up just dies.
So McCoy mentions that these things like coil around like their
Your
person's
spinal cord.
spinal column and their central nervous system. And what they do is they inflict a unspeakable amount of pain onto their victims to influence them to do whatever they want. And both Spock and Kirk's nephew, who by the way never says anything. He is unconscious throughout the entire episode.
Yeah.
Spock and Kirk's nephew are both infected with these things, and Spock like gets up, and as I mentioned, like he goes to the bridge and like flips out and tries to take control of the ship, and they sedate him. And
It takes
McCoy,
like 5 people to
uh,
handle this guy. I like the choreography there.
Vulcans are stronger than humans.
They're stronger, smarter, they live longer, they hear better. They have good eyes and
Yeah,
ears. Yeah.
yeah. We'll get to that later on because I
They're the
found that
superior species, clearly.
they are higher up on the evolutionary ladder than humans are. It's actually quite established in Star Trek.
Oh, do, do they have similar ancestry?
No.
Okay, well then evolutionarily speaking, it's hard to compare the two. But that's another discussion Spock breaks free, right? They end up sedating him again, and they're in kind of a pickle. But when Spock awakens a second time, he has this kudos to Leonard Nimoy for the acting, by the way. He is great at acting like he's in extreme pain, but he's trying to like Zen meditate through it. And he explains when Kirk and McCoy are talking to him later, us Vulcans know that pain is just perceived by the mind and that we can control our mind. So I can control the pain and I can like learn to ignore it. And you have to trust me and let me go. And they
Yeah,
do.
they have him hooked up to a machine that has a bunch of gives a bunch of readouts about like what's going on with him, and McCoy mentions that one of them measures the amount of pain that he's in.
Why don't we have that in our hospitals now?
Right. Um, and so basically, like this thing is inflicting such a high amount of pain on Spock that it completely maxes out the level on this machine.
Enough to kill like a human, which
Yeah,
it has.
yeah,
We've seen it.
and so Spock is able to like basically he's like pain is an emotion. I'm a Vulcan. I can get through this, and he's actually able to like completely work through the pain. And he's like, I can return to active duty, and they're like, that might be true, but we don't know for how long. So why don't you just chill here for a while and until we can figure out how, like if you can maintain this. And he's like, fine, but then he breaks free anyway and goes to a transporter room.
And
Tries to beam away.
I
He
like
takes
how
a
he breaks free again. And I'm like, what, you thought the restraints from the first time were gonna work the second time? But this time he's in control.
Yeah, he's in control. He takes a red toolbox with him.
Yeah, I'm like, what's in that?
Fucking red toolbox.
And here's the thing, it's not this like, oh, it's actually this. No, legit. Like in the story, it's just a red toolbox because he wants to catch one of them.
Yeah.
I
So in the transporter room, there's a random crewman and Scotty there, and Spock knocks out the random crew guy, and
with little Vulcan nerve pinch.
yeah, and Scotty like gets a phaser and like holds him there, and Spock like tells him that like I want to beam down to the planet, and Scotty's like, well, Captain said no one on or off the planet until we figure out what's going on. So Scotty calls Kirk down. Kirk brings McCoy and a bunch of other people with him, and Spock says, yeah, I'm in control. We need to study one of these things. We couldn't do that before. Since I'm already infected, they can't really do much more to me, so I'm the one who should go down there. And I'm like, you know what, man has a point.
And he didn't think they were going to let him, which is why he
yeah
tried to do this of his own.
So Kirk agrees to it. Spock beams down to the planet with his red toolbox in hand. He takes a phaser and stuns one of these things, and opens his toolbox up and grabs out a pair of pinchers, grabs the thing, puts
Barbecue
it in
tongs.
Yeah, puts it in the toolbox. Puts the tongs back in the toolbox, shuts it, and then goes back to the Enterprise.
I loved that. He's just got barbecue tongs and like a red toolbox, and he's like, and in you go. And I'm like, scientific and medically sound. Why not?
The science of the 23rd century, baby.
Sometimes a toolbox just needs to be a toolbox. It just works, man. So they get it. They got it. They got in a science capsule to study it.
Yeah, and they're doing a whole bunch of science on it. They figure out that it's some kind of parasite. It's parasitic in nature.
It's parasitic in nature. It's weird though. Spock explains with McCoy. They're doing a whole bunch of science. I want reports within the hour.
Yeah.
Right, and they come up with this is like a cell.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of a brain cell, a single cell of a brain.
Yeah, and they're like, this is a neuron cell, but it doesn't need to come into contact with the other cells.
But they, even though they're all independent from one another, they all function as one like big, like
One
multi-celled.
larger organism.
Yeah, which that's a really interesting sci-fi concept right there.
Hmm.
Uh, too too bad they just decide to kill this thing.
I yeah, but they don't, because like they can't. They're like, well, we've tried everything. Like
No,
it
well,
doesn't. Oh
eventually
yeah, they
they
do.
do. Yeah.
Oh, I say good riddance. It's just that it's so dangerous to even leave. I mean, are we to believe that every single one on the planet was killed?
That's the implication. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got to wrap these episodes up. Were all episodes fit in an hour block, or is this one special?
No, they were all an hour long.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It flew by. I didn't realize it was 50 minutes until I was nearing to the end of it.
Yeah, the reason why it's 50 minutes is because there were significantly less commercials
Yeah,
on
it was
TV
like
back in the
50
day.
minutes.
Yeah.
What? I was shocked that this episode was 50 minutes, because usually a half hour block has 22 minutes of.
Actually, a lot of modern network TV, most like half-hour sitcoms are like only like 20 minutes now. The rest is commercials. Most hourly
Stings.
most hourly network TV now are about 40 to 41 minutes. Yeah,
Brutal.
yeah. When you watch old TV on DVD, like MASH is a good example. This shocked me when I first saw MASH on DVD back when I was a teenager because the episodes were like 27 minutes long without commercials, and they fit into half-hour blocks. And also
Wow.
what I started noticing too was that I was seeing scenes in episodes on the DVD that I'd never seen before. And so what I realized was very quickly realized was that uh, to add in extra commercials when they're showing the show in syndication in reruns in the modern day, they actually edit the episodes down so they can fit in more commercials.
And you were getting the original episodes on your DVD copy.
Yeah, the original like full cuts of
Oh.
the episodes that would have originally
So you
aired
were
back in the
actually
70s.
seeing the full episodes that you had never seen
So I
on
was
TV.
yeah, so I was seeing stuff in episodes that I'd seen on TV before, stuff that I'd never seen.
It makes me wonder
With
if that was.
probably they probably do that with this show as well to this day. I wouldn't be surprised. Those networks got to make that advertising money, man.
My mind is blown and I have been deceived.
I have no mouth and I must scream.
Oh, so
Uh,
what ends
uh,
up happening? The gist of it is Kirk is like, get in there, eggheads, and are you telling me that we have the most advanced like scientific and like medical like facilities, 14 different like science like facilities on this entire starship, and we can't figure out how to like kill these things?
mhm.
And they end up being like, well, they're not like of the same like realm. They came from somewhere else, and the physics is different, and their biology is different, and it ends up being Kirk. And I saw this coming a million light years away. I knew Kirk was going to be the one to solve it, and I was like, oh, come on, give the scientist some like credit, because he just walks off and he's like, wait, do you remember that Denovan ship? How he was like, he's finally free when he was flying into the sun and he seemed to gain control of himself. What if it has something to do with light? And they're like, oh, I don't know about that. And he's like, do it. And so they amp up like light, like what is it, 1,000 lumens or something like that. And they find out by subjecting it to really powerful light, they can kill this mofo.
Well, yeah, because they had tried basically everything else from the sun. They had tried heat, they had tried ultraviolet radiation, and none of it worked. And Kirk comes to the conclusion that it must be light. So yeah, a 1,000 candle light is what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, to so they bombard this like pus bucket with 1,000 candle light of brightness,
It's
and
an
it indeed,
astronomical term. Yeah, lumens. They kill that. They
yeah.
kill it
So
dead.
yeah, so they kill the thing, and then they're like, okay, well, now we need to do a human. We need to test it actually, like a person who has been afflicted with this. And I thought they were gonna put the kid in there at
I thought
first.
so too. I'm like, throw that fucker in. He ain't gonna live anyway.
Yeah. But no, Spock is like, oh, I'm the one who makes the most sense, and they're like, but you'll be blind.
And McCoy's like, I'll rig up
A,
like a
protective
protective face
eyewear,
mask. Yeah.
and Spock is like, well, you can't really do that for everyone on the planet, so can't do it for me here because we need to know if this works. And they're like, by gosh, you're right. We wish you weren't, but you are.
Your infallible Vulcan logic cannot be questioned. So they throw him in the chamber.
Yep, and it works, but he is indeed blinded by it.
Again, Leonard Nimoy, great actor.
Blinded by the
What a
light.
day Spock has, man. He's fighting through like seemingly like pain that should kill him.
I
And
like
now he's
that.
blind?
I like that when he comes out of the when he comes out of the chamber and like kind of stumbles. He's like, "Oh, it has worked. I'm no longer in pain, but I am also extremely blind." And I think he says it was an equitable trade.
An extremely equitable trade. Yeah. And I'm like,
Like, wow,
I
you were in that much pain that you're like, fuck, if like it means I'm blind, then fair enough. I really like too that like uh McCoy is like apologizing. He's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And
Mr. Spock, I
I like that Spock is straight up just like no, it's fine, doctor. It's done. It's over.
I I agreed with your assessment and I made the choice.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
before Kirk leaves, he just kind of like looks at McCoy and he's like, Bones, as if he's like really upset, but he doesn't say anything and he just kind of storms out.
Well,
So Kirk is
and then later
upset.
he's upset, but then like in the next scene Kirk is like, "Bones, it's not your fault." And I'm like, in the last scene you were about
Bones,
ready to blame him for it.
Bones, it's it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Yeah, and he just keeps talking to him as McCoy's just like kind of
Yeah.
very upset. And that's when McCoy says, hey, he's the best first mate of the entire Starfleet,
Best first officer.
first officer of the entire Starfleet, and I blinded him.
Yeah.
So there's some guilt there.
So they rig
So
up
I'm
a bunch.
glad Kirk came around and was like, instead of blaming him, came around and said it
Yeah.
wasn't his fault.
So they rig up a bunch of satellites and do the same thing to the entire planet, and we get
They
a
do a
shot.
science.
Yeah, and we get a shot of one of these like parasites like burning up on the
Oh,
planet, and like,
what's their conclusion though? Because they come to the conclusion that they didn't need to blind him.
oh right, yeah,
It's not UV light, it's infrared or
no,
another spectrum.
they don't specify. They just say that much like a dog can hear things that human ears can't pick up. The type of light that is toxic to these things is a type of light that humans can't comprehend.
So they never mentioned what kind of radiation it was. It's just not on the visual spectrum for us.
Right.
Yeah. So they don't have to blind everybody.
And McCoy is having a hard time with that because he's like, "You mean I didn't have to blind Mr. Spock?"
It appears not. And that's why that's an emotional scene.
Well, and
Like kudos.
I once again, like I really like Spock's level-headedness here. He's like, "There's no need to apologize, Doctor. It's fine. It's over with."
If they had waited 5 minutes for that lady to come back with this like little data pad for them to
Yeah.
look through it and go, Oh, because they were trying to test the body of it to see what killed it. And right after they blind Spock, the lady's like, "Oh, here's the diagnostics you like ordered." It turns out it's this kind of light, or it's not the visual spectrum. And that was the big like, "My God, what have we done?" moment. And I'm
Hmm.
like, you guys couldn't have waited, but they feel very well. One, it's a
There, there,
episodic
there,
thing.
there is also a degree of urgency here because one of the things that is kind of a ticking clock for them is Kirk's nephew is, as I mentioned, is unconscious throughout the entire episode, and they're like the amount of pain that these things inflict, like he wouldn't be able to handle it. So basically, as soon as that kid wakes up, he's dead. He's going
And
to die in
presumably,
agony.
people are dying every minute
Yeah,
on the planet. Like this thing is lethal.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, like I said, they rig up a bunch of satellites that they shoot out to like blanket the planet in this light, and we see like a shot of one of these things on the ground getting melted by it.
great effects, by the way. The melting like parasites. Yeah, they got the dry ice effect for the smoke, and it's kind of like fading, like from view.
Yeah, and then back on the bridge, they're like the end of the episode is them like getting ready to leave, and then Spock shows up on the bridge, and they're like, "Wait, what? You can see?" He's like, "Oh, yes, we Vulcans have an inner eyelid that is that protects us from ultra light, protects our eyes from ultra sensitive
Because
light.
the light in their system, Vulcan,
Much brighter."
is way brighter. So they've evolved to protect their optics better.
Right.
So it was just temporary temporary blindness.
And I'm like you couldn't have mentioned this before, Spock, when everyone was
You
lamenting.
troll.
When everyone was lamenting about the fact that you were blinded, like you couldn't have mentioned like, no, it's fine. I'll be all right in a few minutes.
You troll. He's a troll, man. And
Yeah.
indeed, McCoy is kind of like, and he turns to Kirk on the bridge, and he's all like, "Hey, uh, like don't tell Spock that I said he was the best first officer in all of Starfleet."
Right. And Spock looks over and is like, "Thank you, Doctor." And Kirk says something to the effect of, "Oh, you were so concerned about his eyes, his superior eyes, you forgot about his superior Vulcan hearing as well."
And then everybody laughs, and the credits roll,
Yeah.
and everything ended up all right.
Ooh. All right. So, Cal, you've just watched a random episode of sorry, I got a prompt on my screen from Zoom being like because I was doing the whole like Star Trek like
Yeah.
ooh. I just got a prompt on Zoom. It's like, "Are you playing music right now? Set up professional audio and audio settings."
Oh
I'm
wow!
like,
So you can emulate a theremin? Is that what they're called? A theremin
it's
so
apparently well
well
enough that it fooled Zoom.
that it thought you were playing an instrument. What?
Yeah,
What?
wild. That's, I got distracted by that for a
That's
second.
the
I'm like,
instrument
what?
they used for the opening, where like it uses air pressure to
Yeah.
like, yeah. Man, when I was a teenager and I found out what that was, I was sure that I was going to learn how to play the theremin. All right,
Uh,
so sorry, you were saying.
Speaking of musical instruments, real quick, the kid who played Kirk's nephew, his name is Craig Huxley. He apparently invented a musical instrument called the blaster beam in the 1970s.
What? Are
Yeah, it's
I'm going in.
is a concept electrical musical instrument consisting of a 12 to 18-foot long metal beam strung with numerous tensed wires under which are mounted electric guitar pickups which can be moved to alter the sound produced. His design was patented in 1984. The instrument was used in the soundtrack to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and
Are you
played it for the
serious?
soundtrack to the movie 10 Cloverfield Lane. Wow.
What? Okay, listeners, wow. Go and Google blaster beam instrument or blaster beam music.
It's been used
Whoa.
in a it's been used in a lot of Star Trek stuff. So that's wild.
I
It was used in the soundtrack to the Prince movie Purple Rain.
I this is wild, man. That is so like retro sci-fi too. That the kid that was in this episode of the original series grew up to make an instrument that was used in movies and Star Trek.
Yeah,
That
a lot of movies, as a matter of fact. It's also used on the soundtrack to the TV show The Orville, which is kind of a homage to Star Trek, so that kind of fits. But yeah, it was used in the movie Doctor Sleep, uh, Austin Powers in Goldmember,
I thank you for looking that up, man. I
the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes remake, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, the TV show Walker Texas Ranger. That's crazy.
amazing.
That's crazy. Anyway, Cal, so you just watched a random episode of Star Trek: The Original Series. Would you watch another one?
I
Would you
would
tune
and I
it?
will.
Would you tune in next week?
I'm
I think.
tuning in next. Oh,
All right. I think that's how I'm going to start phrasing this from now on. You've just watched a random episode of this show. Would you tune in next week if you were watching it on TV?
I will.
All right.
I'm
So would
tuning
I.
in next week, folks.
So would I. Maybe I'll watch some more the original series after we're done recording here. Uh well, that was episode 27 of the Lasercomb podcast. If you want to support the show, you can do that by going to patreon.com/lasercomb, LAZORCOMB, where starting at the $5 and up tier, you get bonus preamble audio of this and all the other shows we do week in and week out, where we kind of just shoot the shit before we get started recording. This week I talked about my some money woes that I'm having relating to a missing electronic funds transfer, and also my benefits package at work. I know, exciting stuff, right? You also get a monthly-ish commentary track at the $5 tier, so go check that out. At the $10 and up tier, if you want if you want to pick a show for us to review a random episode of on this very podcast, you can do that at the $10 and up tier. You also get our weekly-ish news and current events program, Lasercomb Tonight. So Lasercomb, patreon.com/lasercomb. Follow me on Twitter. You can do so at Lasercomb, LAZORCOMB. Cal, you are at.
I am at NeoCal, NEO_KAL.
Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/lasercomb. As I mentioned, this is Star Trek month. So next up on the list is Star Trek: The Next Generation, which I'm pretty excited to get to. So, as always, we're going to go to numbergenerator.org and find out how many episodes Next Generation had. It had 178 per Wikipedia. So, random numbers between 100 and 178. And here we go.
Beep, 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 beep. Ooh.
117, Master Chief himself, John 117. I just watched the second episode of the Halo TV show today. Still really liking the show. Episode 117 is season 5, episode 17, The Outcast.
Ooh.
In this episode, Riker falls in love with Soren, a member of an androgynous race which finds gender specificity unacceptable.
Huh.
I remember this episode. I'm curious to see how it holds up, if it handles the issues of gender identity gracefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like intriguing. And we had mentioned like off air, like Star Trek was always progressive
For its time,
for
yeah.
its time. Yeah.
Some things haven't aged well, but we'll get into more of that next week. Until then, I've been one of your hosts, The Siege.
And I'm NeoCal.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week. Time to beam out.